The first day at a new school was always hard, but for Lynn it felt impossible. She stood at the entrance of Oak Ridge High, clutching her backpack strap so tight her knuckles turned white. Students brushed past her, laughing and talking with friends they'd known their whole lives. No one even glanced her way. Lynn took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. 3 weeks ago, her whole life had been uprooted when her father accepted a teaching job at the local university. They had packed up their apartment in Shanghai and flown halfway across the world to this small American town where the streets were too wide and too quiet. "You'll adjust," her father had said that morning as he dropped her off. Just be yourself, but who was that exactly? Back home, she had been Lynn the piano player, the girl whose fingers could make magic happen on black and white keys. Here, she was just the new girl who couldn't quite hide her accent. The hallway seemed endless as she made her way to her first class, room 103, American History. Lynn slipped into the classroom and took a seat in the back row, hoping to blend into the wall behind her. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, introduced her to the class. "Everyone, this is Lynn Wei, who has joined us from Shanghai, China. Let's make her feel welcome." 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her. Lynn gave a small wave and quickly looked down at her desk. A few students mumbled hello, but most just turned back to their conversations. It wasn't rudeness exactly, just indifference. In some ways, that was worse. The morning dragged on. In each class, the same introduction, the same curious stares that quickly faded to disinterest. By lunchtime, Lynn had spoken exactly 12 words, all of them to teachers. She found an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria and unwrapped the lunch her father had packed: rice with vegetables and a boiled egg. The familiar food should have been comforting, but eating alone while surrounded by groups of chatting students only made her feel more out of place. A burst of laughter caught her attention. At a table nearby, a group of students huddled around a girl with copper-colored hair who was talking animatedly, her hands flying through the air to emphasize whatever story she was telling. Lynn found herself watching them, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. "The showcase is in 6 weeks," the copper-haired girl was saying. "That's barely enough time to pull everything together." "Relax, Amber," said a boy sitting beside her. "You say that every year, and it always turns out fine." "This year is different," Amber insisted. "It's my last year to run the showcase before graduation. It needs to be perfect." Lynn knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but there was something about the word showcase that tugged at her. Back in Shanghai, she had performed in showcases regularly, piano recitals where she played alongside other students from her music school. Her teacher had called her a prodigy once, though her father disliked the word. "It makes it sound like you were born with talent," he'd said. "It erases all your hard work." And she had worked hard, practicing for hours every day since she was 4 years old. The piano had been her constant companion, her voice when words failed her. But since moving to Oak Ridge, she hadn't touched a piano once. Their small rental house didn't have space for one, and she hadn't dared ask her father about lessons. He had enough to worry about with his new job. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Lynn gathered her things and headed to her next class, science, where they were studying sound waves. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, explained how vibrations traveled through the air to create what we hear as music. "Every note on a piano creates a specific frequency," he said. "The A above middle C vibrates at exactly 440 hertz. Lynn smiled to herself. She knew that note well. It was the one orchestras tuned to before performances. Without thinking, her fingers tapped the note on her desk, muscle memory taking over. The boy next to her noticed. "You play?" he asked quietly. Startled that someone was actually speaking to her, Lynn froze. Then she shook her head. "Not anymore," she whispered. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. When the final bell rang, Lynn felt a wave of relief. She walked home slowly, taking in her new neighborhood. The houses here all had yards and driveways, so different from the crowded apartment buildings she was used to. Their rental was small compared to the others on the street, but it had a tiny backyard where her father had already planted a vegetable garden. As she approached her house, she heard it, the delicate notes of a piano floating through the air. Lynn stopped, turning toward the sound. It was coming from the house next door, a blue 2-story with white trim and flowers lining the walkway. The melody was Debussy's Clair de Lune, one of the first classical pieces Lynn had mastered. Without realizing it, Lynn had wandered into the neighbor's yard, drawn by the music like a moth to flame. She found herself peering through a window into what must have been a sitting room. An elderly woman sat at a grand piano, her thin fingers moving across the keys with grace that belied her age. The piano itself was beautiful, polished black wood that gleamed in the afternoon sun streaming through lace curtains. The music stopped abruptly, and the woman turned, spotting Lynn at the window. Lynn jumped back, mortified to be caught spying. She was about to run home when the front door opened. "Hello there," called the woman. She had a soft voice with a slight tremor to it. "You must be HOA's daughter. I saw you both moving in last week." Lynn nodded, too embarrassed to speak. "I'm Rose Abernathy," the woman said. "Would you like to come in? I just put on some tea." Something about Mrs. Abernathy's kind smile made Lynn step forward instead of running away. "I'm Lynn," she said. "I'm sorry for looking in your window. I heard the piano and—" "No need to apologize for appreciating music," Mrs. Abernathy said, holding the door wider. Come in, come in." The inside of the house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Mrs. Abernathy led Lynn to a small kitchen and poured her a cup of tea with shaky hands. "Sugar?" she asked. Lynn shook her head. "No, thank you. So how do you like Oak Ridge so far?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, sitting across from her at a round wooden table. "It's different," Lynn said carefully. Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "That's a polite way of saying you hate it." Despite herself, Lynn smiled. "I don't hate it. It's just new. And school is difficult?" "Lonely," Lynn admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Mrs. Abernathy nodded as if this made perfect sense. "New places often are at first. It takes time to find where you belong." She sipped her tea. "You know something about music, I think. The way you were listening, that's how musicians listen." Lynn looked down at her cup. "I used to play piano. Back in Shanghai." "Used to?" Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. "Music isn't something you leave behind, dear. It stays with you." "We don't have a piano here," Lynn explained. "And anyway, I need to focus on school, on fitting in." Mrs. Abernathy was quiet for a moment, studying Lynn over the rim of her teacup. "You know," she said finally, "I taught piano for over 50 years before my arthritis got too bad. These days I can still play for myself, but teaching is too much. My piano just sits there most of the time, hardly getting the use it deserves." Lynn's heart beat a little faster, but she didn't dare hope. "You're welcome to practice here, if you'd like," Mrs. Abernathy continued, as if offering to lend a cup of sugar rather than access to the beautiful grand piano Lynn had seen. "Really?" Lynn couldn't hide her excitement. "I wouldn't be bothering you?" "Bothering me?" "Child, good music is never a bother. It would be a joy to hear that piano played properly again." For the first time since arriving in Oak Ridge, Lynn felt a small flicker of belonging. "Thank you," she said. "That would be wonderful." Mrs. Abernathy smiled. "Well then, finish your tea and we'll see what those fingers of yours remember." Later that evening, as Lynn walked the few steps back to her house, her fingertips tingled with the memory of the smooth keys beneath them. She had played for almost an hour, rusty at first, but then with growing confidence. Mrs. Abernathy had sat in an armchair, eyes closed, listening. "You have a gift," the older woman had said when Lynn finally stopped. "A rare one." Lynn wasn't sure about that, but she knew one thing. For the first time since leaving Shanghai, she had felt like herself again. Tomorrow at school might still be difficult, but now she had this secret joy waiting for her at the end of each day. As she opened her front door, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow after all. 2 weeks passed and Lynn settled into a routine. School remained a lonely affair, but her afternoons with Mrs. Abernathy and the grand piano made everything bearable. Each day after school, she would rush home, drop off her backpack and head next door. Mrs. Abernathy always welcomed her with a smile and often a plate of cookies or a cup of tea. "Play me something new today," the older woman would say, settling into her armchair by the window, and Lynn would play. Sometimes classical pieces she had memorized years ago, sometimes traditional Chinese songs that reminded her of home. The music filled the small house and spilled out into the yard, becoming as much a part of the neighborhood as the chirping birds and rustling leaves. At school, Lynn kept to herself. She answered questions when called on in class, but otherwise remained quiet, invisible. She ate lunch alone, did her work, and counted the minutes until the final bell. No one was mean to her exactly, but no one went out of their way to include her either. Until a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. Lynn was sitting in the cafeteria, a book propped open beside her lunch, when a shadow fell across the page. She looked up to find Amber, the copper-haired girl who seemed to be at the center of everything, standing over her table. "You're Lynn, right? From China?" Amber asked, though it wasn't really a question. Everyone knew who the new girl was. Lynn nodded, closing her book slowly. Behind Amber stood 3 other students who Lynn recognized from her classes. "I'm Amber, I run the music club," Amber said, sliding into the seat across from Lynn without asking. The others followed, surrounding Lynn like a small army. "We're putting on a showcase in a month. It's kind of a big deal around here." "Oh," Lynn said, not sure why Amber was telling her this. "Thing is, we need more performers. I was thinking you might want to join in." Lynn blinked in surprise. "Me?" "Yeah, you. Mrs. Chen said you just transferred from Shanghai Conservatory Middle School. That's a big deal, music school, right?" Lynn hadn't expected anyone to look into her background. "It's a regular school with a strong music program," she corrected softly. "Whatever. Point is, you must be able to do something. Sing, dance, play an instrument?" Lynn hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes, to tell Amber that she played piano, that music was the one thing in this new place that made sense to her. But another part, the part that had spent weeks feeling out of place, was wary. "I don't perform anymore," she said finally. Amber raised an eyebrow. "Don't or can't?" Something in Amber's tone made Lynn sit up straighter. "I can play piano. I just choose not to perform." One of the boys at the table snorted. "Everyone says they can play piano. Chopsticks doesn't count." "Tyler," Amber warned, but she was smiling too. She turned back to Lynn. "Look, we really do need more acts. The showcase is a fundraiser for new band equipment. If you can actually play, we'd love to have you." Before Lynn could respond, the bell rang. Amber stood, gathering her things. "Think about it. We practice every Thursday after school in the music room. Come by if you're interested." Lynn watched them walk away, a strange mix of feelings swirling inside her. It was the first real invitation she'd received since arriving at Oak Ridge High. But something about it didn't sit right. The way they had laughed, the doubt in their voices, that afternoon. When Lynn arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's house, she was still thinking about the encounter. "You're frowning," Mrs. Abernathy observed as she opened the door. "Bad day?" Lynn shook her head. "Not exactly. Just confusing." She followed Mrs. Abernathy to the kitchen and accepted a glass of lemonade. "There's a music showcase at school. Someone asked if I wanted to participate." "That sounds wonderful." Mrs. Abernathy's face lit up. "What will you play?" "I didn't say I would do it. Why ever not?" "You're more than talented enough." Lynn traced a finger through the condensation on her glass. "I don't think they actually want me to play. I think they were just, I don't know, making fun of me maybe." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Did they say something unkind?" "Not exactly. It was more how they said it. Like they didn't believe I could really play." "Ah." Mrs. Abernathy nodded knowingly. "And that bothers you?" "Yes, no, I don't know," Lynn sighed. "I don't care what they think of me. Don't you?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice was gentle. Lynn looked down at her hands. Pianist hands, her teacher in Shanghai had called them. Long fingers, strong wrists. Hands that could coax beauty from ivory and ebony. "Maybe I do care. A little." "There's no shame in wanting to be seen for who you really are," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Sometimes we have to show people who we are before they can see us clearly." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping lemonade. Then Mrs. Abernathy stood. "Come, I want to show you something." She led Lynn to a small room off the living room that Lynn had never entered before. It was a study of sorts, with bookshelves lining the walls. Mrs. Abernathy went to a cabinet and pulled out a photo album. "Here," she said, sitting on a small sofa and patting the spot beside her. "Look at this." Lynn sat down and Mrs. Abernathy opened the album. The first page held a black and white photograph of a young woman seated at a piano on a stage. Though the picture was old and slightly faded, there was no mistaking the proud tilt of the chin, the straight back. A young Mrs. Abernathy. "That was my debut with the Boston Symphony Orchestra," Mrs. Abernathy said, a hint of pride still evident in her voice. "I was 22 years old." Lynn stared at the photograph. "You played with an orchestra?" Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "For many years. I was a concert pianist before I became a teacher. I had no idea. Lynn said, looking at her neighbor with new respect. There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Mrs. Abernathy said with a small smile. She turned the page to show more photographs. Mrs. Abernathy in different concert halls, with different orchestras in different countries. You traveled all over the world, Lynn said, amazed. Music took me places I never dreamed of going. Mrs. Abernathy's voice grew wistful. But do you know what the hardest part was? The very beginning. Believing I could do it at all, she turned more pages, and Lynn saw younger versions of Mrs. Abernathy growing up through the photos. Here, Mrs. Abernathy said, pointing to a picture of a teenage girl seated at an upright piano in what looked like a school auditorium. My first recital. I was terrified. My hands shook so badly I thought I'd never make it through the piece. What happened? Lynn asked. I played anyway. Terribly at first, but then something clicked. The music took over, and suddenly it was just me and the piano and the notes. Mrs. Abernathy closed the album gently. I've never regretted it, sharing my music. Not once. Lynn thought about this as they returned to the piano room. She sat on the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. The showcase is in 4 weeks, she said finally. Plenty of time to prepare, Mrs. Abernathy replied, a hopeful note in her voice. I'd have to practice every day. You're already doing that. I'd need a piece that would show them, really show them. Mrs. Abernathy smiled. I might have a few suggestions. Lynn took a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. The next day at lunch, Lynn approached the table where Amber and her friend sat. I want to be in the showcase, she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. I play piano. Amber looked surprised to see Lynn standing there, but she recovered quickly. Great, we meet tomorrow after school. Can you tell us what piece you're planning to play? Lynn had spent half the night discussing options with Mrs. Abernathy, going through old sheet music and recordings. They had finally settled on a piece that was challenging but not impossible with 4 weeks of practice. Rachmaninoff, Lynn said. Piano Concerto No. 2, first movement. A boy at the table, Tyler, Lynn remembered, laughed out loud. Rachmaninoff? Seriously? It's one of the hardest piano concertos ever written, said another girl, her eyes wide. You can't just play that. I can, Lynn said, though her certainty wavered in the face of their doubt. Look, Amber said, not unkindly. Why don't you come tomorrow and play something for us? Something a little more realistic. Lynn felt her face growing hot. Rachmaninoff is realistic. For me, sure it is, Tyler said, rolling his eyes. And I'm secretly a rock star. The table erupted in laughter. Lynn stood there, frozen, as the sound washed over her. Hey, if she says she can play it, let her try, Amber said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it either. What's the worst that could happen? No one dies from embarrassment, right? More laughter. Lynn turned and walked away, her lunch forgotten, her appetite gone. She hadn't expected them to believe her, not really, but the mockery stung more than she wanted to admit. After school, she went straight to Mrs. Abernathy's house, not even stopping at home first. I need the Rachmaninoff score, she said as soon as Mrs. Abernathy opened the door. The full score, not the simplified version. Mrs. Abernathy studied her face. What happened? They laughed at me, Lynn said, the words coming out in a rush. They don't think I can play Rachmaninoff. They think I'll embarrass myself. And that makes you want to prove them wrong? Lynn nodded, a determined set to her jaw. I'll show them. I'll practice every day for hours if I have to. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, a proud, fierce little smile. Well then, she said, we'd better get started. The next day after school, Lynn stood outside the music room, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the small window in the door, she could see Amber and about 15 other students inside. Some held instruments, guitars, flutes, violins. Others were arranging chairs or looking through sheet music. They all seemed so comfortable with each other, laughing and talking as they prepared for practice. Lynn took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The chatter didn't stop immediately, but it slowed as students noticed her standing there, awkward and alone. Oh, hey, you came, Amber said, waving her over. Everyone, this is Lynn. She's going to play piano for us. All eyes turned to Lynn. She felt her cheeks grow warm but forced herself to walk forward. We don't actually have a piano in here, Amber explained, gesturing around the band room. Just the keyboard. Will that work? Lynn looked at the electric keyboard set up in the corner. It was a far cry from Mrs. Abernathy's grand piano, or even the upright she had practiced on back home. But it had weighted keys at least. "It's fine," she said quietly. Tyler, sitting with a group of boys near the back, smirked. "Let's hear this famous Rachmaninoff then." Lynn hesitated. She had only just started learning the piece with Mrs. Abernathy. She couldn't possibly play it yet. Not well, anyway. But backing down now would only confirm what they already thought, that she was all talk. "I've only just begun working on it," she admitted. "I can play something else for now." "Sure," Amber said, gesturing toward the keyboard. "Whatever you want." Lynn walked to the keyboard and sat down, adjusting the bench. The room had gone completely quiet, everyone watching her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. She placed her fingers on the keys, considering what to play. Something impressive enough to prove herself, but not so difficult that she would stumble through it. She began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had performed many times before. The opening notes filled the room, soft and delicate. Lynn closed her eyes, letting muscle memory take over. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the watching eyes and listening ears. There was only the music flowing from her fingers like water. When she finished, she opened her eyes. The room was silent. She turned to face the others, uncertain. "That was really good," Amber said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Like really good." A few students nodded in agreement. Others looked impressed. Only Tyler and a couple of his friends seemed unaffected. "It's a pretty basic piece," Tyler said with a shrug. "Any second-year piano student could play it." "Let's see you do it then," a girl with braids challenged from across the room. Tyler rolled his eyes. "I don't play piano. I'm just saying it's not Rachmaninoff." "No, it's not," Lynn agreed, finding her voice. "But I will play Rachmaninoff at the showcase. I just need time to prepare." "The showcase is in 4 weeks," Amber reminded her. "That's not a lot of time for a piece like that." "I know," Lynn said. "But I can do it." Amber studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll put you down for Rachmaninoff. Just have a backup ready, okay? Something like what you just played." Lynn wanted to argue, to insist that she wouldn't need a backup, but she bit her tongue. "Okay, great." Amber clapped her hands together. "Now let's go through the rest of the program." For the next hour, Lynn sat with the group as other students performed their pieces. Some were quite good. A boy who played jazz saxophone, a girl with a hauntingly beautiful voice. Others were still rough around the edges. Everyone received encouragement, suggestions, and applause. When the meeting ended, Amber handed out a practice schedule. "We have the auditorium for rehearsals every Tuesday and Thursday until the showcase. Everyone needs to be there, no excuses." Lynn looked at the schedule, her heart sinking. Twice a week meant less time at Mrs. Abernathy's, less time to practice the Rachmaninoff. "Is there a problem?" Amber asked, noticing Lynn's expression. "No," Lynn said quickly. "No problem." As she walked home, Lynn's mind raced. She would need to practice more somehow. Maybe she could go to Mrs. Abernathy's before school, or during lunch. She was so lost in thought that she nearly walked past her house. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on her porch, a mug of tea in her hands. "How did it go?" she called as Lynn approached. Lynn climbed the steps and sat beside her neighbor on the porch swing. "They let me in," she said. "But I'm not sure they believe I can do the Rachmaninoff." "Did you play for them?" "Chopin, the E-flat Nocturne." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "A beautiful piece." "And what did they think?" Most of them seemed impressed. But this boy, Tyler? He said it was basic, that any second-year student could play it, and that bothered you. Lynn sighed. "Yes, then use it," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice firm. "Use that feeling. Channel it into your practice." Over the next week, Lynn fell into a new routine. She woke up at 5 in the morning to practice at Mrs. Abernathy's before school. The older woman would make her breakfast afterward, toast with jam and tea, insisting that Lynn couldn't play on an empty stomach. After school, Lynn would return for another 2 hours of practice before dinner. The Rachmaninoff was as challenging as she had expected. The complex rhythms, the demanding runs, the crashing chords that required not just skill but physical strength, all of it tested her abilities. There were moments of frustration when her fingers wouldn't cooperate, when a passage seemed impossible to master. "It's too hard," she admitted to Mrs. Abernathy one evening after a particularly difficult session. Maybe Tyler was right. "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy said briskly. "You're making remarkable progress. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was a Rachmaninoff performance. But the showcase is getting closer, Lynn said. What if I'm not ready? You will be, Mrs. Abernathy assured her. But only if you believe you will be. Half of playing difficult music is believing you can do it. At school, Lynn attended the Tuesday and Thursday rehearsals as required. Each time she played a different piece. Always something polished and perfect, but never Rachmaninoff. Amber seemed satisfied, but Tyler remained skeptical. Still working on that Rachmaninoff? He asked with a smirk after one rehearsal. Or have you given up? I'm working on it, Lynn said, trying to keep her voice steady. You know, Tyler said, leaning in closer. No one would blame you if you stuck with something simpler. Better to play it safe than crash and burn in front of the whole school. Lynn said nothing, just gathered her things and left. His words followed her home, mixing with her own doubts. 2 weeks before the showcase, Lynn's father noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Are you sleeping enough? He asked over dinner, concern evident in his voice. I'm fine, Lynn assured him. Just busy with school. And piano, he added. Mrs. Abernathy told me you've been practicing with her. She says you're very dedicated. Lynn looked up in surprise. You talked to Mrs. Abernathy? Her father nodded. She invited me over for tea last week while you were at school. She played a recording of you practicing. You sound wonderful, Lynn. Lynn felt a rush of warmth. Thanks, Dad. She told me about the showcase too, he continued. I've already requested the evening off from work. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Lynn hadn't even thought about her father attending the showcase. The idea of him sitting in the audience watching her either succeed or fail added a new layer of pressure. Dad, she said hesitantly, what if I'm not good enough? What if I mess up? Her father reached across the table and took her hand. Then you mess up. The world doesn't end. You learn and grow and try again another day. But everyone will be watching. All those kids from school who already think I can't do it. Then give them something to remember, her father said simply. But Lynn, remember this. You're playing for yourself first, not for them. The next day at Mrs. Abernathy's, Lynn attacked the Rachmaninoff with renewed determination. The piece was coming together section by section. The opening chords no longer seemed impossible. Her fingers found the complex patterns more easily. The music was becoming part of her. You're ready to play it all the way through, Mrs. Abernathy declared after Lynn mastered a particularly difficult passage. The whole first movement? Lynn asked, nervous but excited. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. From beginning to end. No stopping, no matter what happens. Just like in the showcase. Lynn positioned her hands over the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The familiar opening chords resonated through the room, followed by the tender melody that always reminded Lynn of someone telling a story. Someone who had seen both joy and sorrow. As she played, Lynn became aware of Mrs. Abernathy moving to the window and opening it wider. The music would be flowing out into the neighborhood now, for anyone passing by to hear. The thought made her nervous, but she didn't falter. The piece built in intensity, the runs becoming faster, the chords more powerful. Lynn's fingers flew across the keys, her body swaying with the music. When she reached the triumphant climax, she poured every emotion into it. Her loneliness in this new place, her frustration with Tyler's doubt, her determination to prove herself. And then it was over. The final chords hung in the air, and Lynn's hands dropped to her lap, trembling slightly from exertion and emotion. Bravo, Mrs. Abernathy said softly, her eyes shining. Absolutely bravo. Lynn smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. For the first time, she truly believed she could do this. What she didn't know was that outside, drawn by the music flowing through the open window, a small group had gathered on the sidewalk. Among them, walking home from a student council meeting, was Amber, standing perfectly still, her mouth slightly open in surprise. The next day at school, Lynn noticed something odd. People were looking at her in the hallways, not the usual quick glance and look away, but actual double takes, followed by whispers. In math class, a girl she had never spoken to asked if she was really playing at the showcase. At lunch, 2 boys from the band invited her to sit with them. Is something going on? Lynn asked them as she set her tray down, confused by the sudden attention. The boys exchanged glances. You haven't heard? One asked. Lynn shook her head. Someone posted a video of you playing piano. It's all over the school group chat. Lynn nearly choked on her water. A video? Of me, when? How? The boy pulled out his phone and showed her. It was a short clip, obviously taken from outside Mrs. Abernathy's window. The quality wasn't great, but you could clearly see Lynn at the piano, playing the climactic section of the Rachmaninoff. The video had dozens of comments. Who posted this? Lynn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amber did, last night. Lynn didn't know whether to be mortified or furious. She had been recorded without her knowledge, without her permission. But as she scrolled through the comments, her anger faded slightly. Whoa, she's actually amazing. No way that's the new girl. Is it really? This is insane. Professional level. Okay, I take back everything I said. And below these, a comment from Tyler. Could be anyone. Could be fake. We'll see at the showcase. Lynn handed the phone back, her mind racing. Part of her was pleased. People were finally seeing what she could do. But another part was terrified. The video had raised expectations. Now everyone would be watching, waiting to see if she could really play like that live on stage. After school, Lynn went straight to Mrs. Abernathy's house. The older woman answered the door with a knowing smile. I take it you've heard about your new fan club? She asked, ushering Lynn inside. You knew about the video? Lynn asked, surprised. The neighbor's grandson showed it to me this morning. Quite the sensation you've become. Lynn groaned and sank onto the piano bench. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. I wanted to surprise everyone at the showcase, not have them all waiting to see if I'm as good as the video. Does it matter how they found out? Mrs. Abernathy asked gently. The truth is the truth. You can play, and play beautifully. Now they know it. Not all of them believe it, Lynn said, thinking of Tyler's comment. And what if I mess up at the showcase? What if I freeze or forget the notes? Then you'll recover and keep going, just like any professional would. Mrs. Abernathy sat beside Lynn on the bench. You've been practicing for weeks. You know this piece inside and out. One video doesn't change that. Lynn nodded, trying to believe it. She flexed her fingers and positioned them over the keys. From the beginning? Mrs. Abernathy smiled. From the beginning. At Thursday's rehearsal, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. When Lynn walked into the auditorium, several students greeted her by name. Amber waved her over enthusiastically. Lynn! There you are. We need to talk about your performance. Lynn braced herself, expecting criticism or questions about the video. I think you should close the show, Amber said instead. The final spot? It would end the showcase with a bang. Lynn blinked in surprise. The closing spot was the most prestigious position, usually reserved for the best performance. But I thought Zach's band was closing, she said, referring to a popular senior whose rock group had been the planned finale. Amber waved a hand dismissively. They'll understand. Your Rachmaninoff is going to bring the house down. It's perfect for the finale. Lynn didn't know what to say. A week ago, these same people had barely believed she could play at all. Now they wanted to build the entire showcase around her performance. About the video, Lynn began, finding her voice. You shouldn't have— I know, Amber cut her off. I should have asked first. But I was just so blown away. I was walking by your neighbor's house and I heard this incredible music. I had to record it. And then I had to share it. Everyone needed to hear how amazing you are. There was something in Amber's enthusiasm that seemed genuine, and Lynn felt her anger softening. Still, she felt it needed to be said. Please don't record me without asking again. Absolutely. Promise. Amber mimed, crossing her heart. So will you close the show? Lynn hesitated. The final spot meant more pressure, more eyes on her, but it also meant people truly believed in her now. Okay, she agreed finally. I'll close the show. As Lynn walked to the piano to begin her rehearsal, she passed Tyler slouched in a seat near the back. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his resentment like a physical thing. She wondered why he disliked her so much. What had she ever done to him except be good at something? She pushed the thought away and focused on her music. Today she would play the entire first movement of the Rachmaninoff for the group. It was time to show them, all of them, what she could really do. The week before the showcase passed in a blur of rehearsals and practice. Lynn's routine became even more rigorous. She was at Mrs. Abernathy's house every spare moment, fine-tuning passages, working on dynamics, perfecting her performance. You need to rest too, Mrs. Abernathy cautioned when she found Lynn still practicing at 9 o'clock one evening. Tired fingers make mistakes. I can't afford mistakes, Lynn said, flexing her sore hands. Not now. Everyone makes mistakes, dear. Even the greatest pianists in the world. It's how you handle them that matters. Mrs. Abernathy gently closed the piano lid. Now go home and get some sleep. Doctor's orders. Lynn smiled tiredly. Yes, ma'am. The night before the showcase, Lynn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed playing the piece in her mind, her fingers twitching against the sheets as if they were keys. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the auditorium full of people all staring at her, waiting for her to fail. At 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and got dressed. It was too early to go to Mrs. Abernathy's, so she went for a walk instead, hoping the cool morning air would clear her head. Without meaning to, she found herself walking toward the school. The building was dark and silent, the parking lot empty. Lynn sat on a bench outside, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to pale pink. A janitor arrived at 6 and, seeing her sitting there, asked if she was okay. Just nervous, Lynn admitted. There's a showcase tonight. I'm performing. The janitor, an older man with kind eyes, nodded understandingly. Stage fright. I've seen it before. Every year, same thing. You kids work yourselves into a state. I'm afraid I'll mess up, Lynn confessed. In front of everyone. The janitor chuckled. Let me tell you something, young lady. I've seen 30 years of school performances. Talent shows, plays, concerts, you name it. Know what I remember most? Not the perfect performances. It's the ones where something went wrong and the kid just kept going. Those are the brave ones. Those are the real artists. Lynn thought about this as she walked home. Maybe he was right. Maybe perfection wasn't the goal. Maybe it was about the music, about sharing something beautiful even if it wasn't flawless. By the time evening arrived, Lynn was surprisingly calm. Her father helped her get ready, ironing her black dress while she fixed her hair. You look like your mother, he said softly when she emerged from her room. She would be so proud. Lynn felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them away. I wish she could be here. She is, in a way, her father said, giving her a gentle hug. Every time you play, I hear her in your music. Mrs. Abernathy joined them for the drive to school, a corsage of white roses in her hand. For the artist, she said, pinning it to Lynn's dress. It's tradition. The auditorium was packed when they arrived. Lynn peeked through the curtains and felt her heart race at the sight of all those faces. Her father and Mrs. Abernathy would be sitting in the front row. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on it, despite the difficulty she had walking these days. Backstage was organized chaos. Students in various costumes rushed back and forth doing last-minute preparations. Amber, clipboard in hand, was trying to maintain order. There you are, she exclaimed when she saw Lynn. You're on in about an hour. The piano's all set up. Do you need anything? Water, a snack? A paper bag to breathe into? Lynn shook her head, smiling despite her nerves. I'm okay, thanks. Great, you can wait in the music room if you want some quiet. I'll send someone to get you when it's almost time. Lynn nodded gratefully and slipped away to the empty music room. She sat at the keyboard, not playing, just feeling the keys beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, trying to center herself. A noise at the door made her look up. Tyler stood there watching her. Hey, he said awkwardly. Hey, Lynn replied, surprised. They hadn't spoken directly since the video incident. Tyler shifted his weight from one foot to the other. So, you're closing the show? Yes. That's cool. He seemed to be struggling with what to say next. Look, I just wanted to... I heard you practicing at that old lady's house. Before the video, I walk by there sometimes on my way home. Lynn waited, unsure where this was going. You're really good, Tyler finally blurted out. Like really good? I'm sorry I was a jerk about it. Lynn was so surprised she almost laughed. Thank you, she said instead. That means a lot. Tyler nodded, still awkward. Anyway, good luck out there. You're going to kill it. And then he was gone, leaving Lynn to wonder at the strange encounter. She didn't have long to think about it, though, because a few minutes later, a freshman girl appeared at the door. They're ready for you, she said. It's time. Lynn stood, smoothing her dress. Her hands were surprisingly steady. She followed the girl to the wings of the stage where Amber waited. The band just finished, Amber whispered. I'm going out to introduce you now. Deep breaths, okay? Lynn nodded. She could hear Amber walking onto the stage. The tap of her shoes against the wooden floor, the feedback from the microphone as she adjusted it. Ladies and gentlemen, Amber's voice rang out through the auditorium. For our final performance tonight, we have something truly special. When Lin Wei joined us just 2 months ago from Shanghai, None of us knew we had a world-class pianist in our midst. Tonight, she'll be performing the first movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging pieces in classical music. Please welcome Lin Wei. The audience applauded as Lin walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, making it hard to see faces, but she could just make out her father and Mrs. Abernathy in the front row. She gave a small bow, then sat at the grand piano that had been brought in specially for the showcase. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, hands hovering above the keys. The auditorium fell silent, waiting. Lin took a deep breath, closed her eyes briefly, and began to play. The opening chords filled the auditorium, deep and resonant. Lin's fingers pressed into the keys with practiced precision, the familiar movement grounding her despite the hundreds of eyes watching. She played the famous beginning slowly, deliberately, each chord building on the last until the melody emerged, haunting and beautiful. As she moved into the main theme, Lin felt something shift inside her. The nervousness faded, replaced by a calm focus. The audience disappeared. The stage lights dimmed in her awareness. There was only Lin and the piano and the music flowing between them like a conversation. She thought of Mrs. Abernathy's words. "You're playing for yourself first." Yes, that was it. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. This was about the music, the reason she had first fallen in love with the piano as a small child. The joy of creating something beautiful. Lin's body swayed slightly as the piece built in intensity. Her hands moved across the keyboard with increasing speed, tackling the complex runs that had given her so much trouble during practice. Now they flowed effortlessly, one note cascading into the next like water over stones. In the front row, Mrs. Abernathy watched with shining eyes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, Lin's father sat perfectly still, barely breathing, his face a mixture of pride and wonder. Neither had ever heard Lin play quite like this before. With such freedom, such emotion. The piece reached its first climactic moment, and Lin's left hand thundered out bass notes while her right hand danced through arpeggios. The sound filled every corner of the auditorium, washing over the audience in waves. Some people leaned forward in their seats. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. When Lin reached the tender middle section, she played more softly, coaxing rather than commanding the notes. Her touch was delicate, almost a caress. The melody here was wistful, like a memory of something beautiful and lost. Lin thought of her mother, of Shanghai, of the life she had left behind. She poured all of that longing into the music. Backstage, the other performers had gathered to watch. Amber stood with her mouth slightly open, her clipboard forgotten at her side. Tyler, who had claimed not to care about classical music, couldn't look away. The band members who had been annoyed at losing their closing spot now understood why. Lin was unaware of all of this. As she approached the most challenging part of the piece, the section that had frustrated her most during practice. Her fingers flew across the keys faster and faster. The technical demands were enormous. Octave jumps, crossed hands, rapid chord progressions. Any one of these elements would be difficult on its own. Together, they formed a mountain that many pianists never fully conquered. For a brief moment, Lin's left hand slipped on a difficult passage. A wrong note rang out, just one among hundreds, but she felt it like a physical sting. In that split second, the spell threatened to break. The audience came back into focus. The doubt crept in. But then Lin remembered the janitor's words about the performers who kept going after a mistake. Those are the real artists. She took a breath and pushed forward. One wrong note couldn't derail all that she had built. The music was bigger than any single moment. As she moved into the final section, Lin felt a surge of something powerful rising within her, a mix of determination and joy and something she couldn't quite name. The tempo increased. The dynamics grew louder. Her whole body was part of the performance now, leaning into the crescendos, pulling back for the softer moments. The final build-up began, the moment the piece had been working toward all along. Lin's hands were everywhere at once, spanning octaves, building chords, racing through runs that seemed almost impossible. The sound was massive now, triumphant and powerful. This was Rachmaninoff at his most passionate, his most demanding, and Lin was equal to it. Every hour of practice, every moment of doubt, every struggle had led to this. Her fingers found each note precisely where it needed to be, with exactly the right touch. The music poured out of her, not just from her hands but from her heart. When she struck the final chords, decisive, conclusive, absolute, the sound rang through the auditorium like a declaration. Then silence. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. No one breathed. The final notes hung in the air like a spell no one wanted to break. Then, from the back of the auditorium, someone stood up. Then another person. And another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. The applause started slowly, almost hesitantly, then grew into a roar. Cheers and whistles joined the clapping. In the front row, Lynn's father wiped tears from his eyes while Mrs. Abernathy beamed with pride. Lynn sat frozen at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had expected polite applause at best. Maybe some surprised looks. Not this standing ovation that showed no signs of stopping. Not this outpouring of genuine appreciation. Amber appeared at her side, taking her hand and pulling her to her feet. "Oh," she whispered. "They're clapping for you." Lynn rose and faced the audience, giving a small, slightly awkward bow. The applause intensified. She bowed again, deeper this time. When she straightened, she caught sight of her father in the front row, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Beside him, Mrs. Abernathy had tears streaming down her face, unashamed. Lynn felt her own eyes filling with tears. This moment, this was why she played. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for connection, for the chance to share something meaningful with others. As the applause finally began to die down, Lynn made her way backstage. She was immediately surrounded by her fellow performers, all talking at once. "That was incredible. How did you do that? I've never heard anything like it." Even Tyler looked impressed, giving her a thumbs up from the back of the group. Amber pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Lynn. "You were amazing," she said. "Absolutely amazing." Before Lynn could respond, her father and Mrs. Abernathy appeared. Her father hugged her tightly, too overcome to speak. Mrs. Abernathy waited her turn, then took Lynn's hands in her own. "My dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you have made an old pianist very, very happy." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The principal made a speech about the importance of arts in education, using Lynn's performance as an example. People Lynn had never spoken to came up to congratulate her. Parents asked if she gave piano lessons. A local newspaper photographer took her picture at the piano for next week's edition. Through it all, Lynn felt strangely calm, as if the performance had emptied her of all nervousness, all doubt. She had done what she set out to do, not just play Rachmaninoff, but play it with heart. As they walked to the car afterward, Lynn's father put an arm around her shoulders. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said. "I felt her there," Lynn admitted quietly, "while I was playing." Like she was listening, her father squeezed her shoulder. She was. Mrs. Abernathy, walking slowly on Lynn's other side, added, "Music has a way of connecting us across time and space. When you play like that, you touch something eternal." The next Monday at school was different than any day since Lynn had arrived at Oak Ridge High. As she walked through the hallways, people greeted her by name. In classes, students who had never spoken to her before asked to sit nearby. At lunch, she had so many invitations she didn't know which table to choose. "Quite the celebrity," Amber commented as Lynn finally settled at a table with the music club members. "How does it feel?" Lynn considered the question. "Strange," she said honestly. "A month ago, no one knew my name." "That's what happens when you hide your light," said a girl across the table. "People can't see it." After school, Lynn went as usual to Mrs. Abernathy's house. The older woman was waiting on the porch, a small package in her hands. "A gift," she said as Lynn climbed the steps. "For the artist." Lynn opened the package carefully. Inside was a framed photograph from the showcase. Lynn at the piano, completely absorbed in the music, her face transformed by the joy of playing. She hadn't even noticed a photographer. "To remind you," Mrs. Abernathy said, "of who you really are, no matter where life takes you." Lynn looked at the photograph, seeing herself as others had seen her that night. Not the shy new girl from Shanghai. Not the outsider struggling to fit in. Just a musician doing what she was born to do. "Thank you," she said, hugging the older woman carefully. "For everything." Mrs. Abernathy patted her back. "No need for thanks. Just promise me you'll keep playing." "The world needs your music," Lynn smiled. "I promise." They went inside together to the piano that had become Lynn's second home. Without being asked, Lynn sat down and began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple Chinese folk song her mother had taught her long ago. Mrs. Abernathy closed her eyes, listening. Beautiful, she murmured. What is it called? Homecoming, Lynn replied, her fingers finding the familiar melody with ease. And as she played, Lynn realized that's exactly what this was.